So for question 1 of the free response questions, first of all, keep in mind this was originally a calculator problem, so you can use your calculator for anything that you need to on this one. So we have a continuous function. We know what g of x is, we know what h of x is, and we have a graph of f of x. So the first question they're asking us is to find k prime of 0. Before you find k prime of 0, you're going to just want to solve for k prime. So you'll notice that k is a product. So that means to find the derivative, we are going to use the product rule. So our derivative of a product is going to be our first thing times the derivative of the second thing plus the second times the derivative of the first. So we get that. I'm now going to substitute in 0 for all of those. And you're going to have to find each one of these values. Okay, so first of all, I'm actually going to work these out on the side just so you can see what I got. So f of 0, that's going to be from my graph. F of 0 is going to be my y value when x is 0, so that's going to give me 3. G prime of 0 and g of 0 I'm going to come back to in just a second. So f prime of 0 is going to be the slope of the tangent line of the graph. So actually that graph is already a line, so we're just going to find the slope of the line. So it's going to be the slope of that graph. And we have a few ways that we can do that. You can actually just count values out if you want to, or you can evaluate it. I'm just going to evaluate it using 2 points that I know are on that line. So I know that 0, 3 is on the line. And I also know that 2, 7 is on the line. So I'm just going to use my slope formula. When I do that, I get that it's going to be equal to 2. And actually, once you get that, that's the first point that you can earn for this problem. So next thing I can do is find out those g's. G of 0, actually really very easy. You just plug in 0 to that equation. G prime of 0, there's 2 ways to do it. You can do it using your calculator. If you do that, you end up getting negative 0.289. If you are not sure how to do that on your calculator, please make sure that you are able to do that before the AP test. They're kind of assuming that you know how to do that. So you're going to really have trouble if you don't, since it's a full AP test, full calculator AP test this time. So feel free to email me if you have any questions about that, by the way. If you want to work this one out by hand, it's not that bad. I'm not going to do that, but if you find the derivative by hand, you do end up getting, once it's simplified, you get 2x minus 1 over 2 times the square root of x squared minus x plus 3. So it's still long, but it's not too terrible. You get the same value for g prime of 0, but you might get it in a radical. I ended up getting negative 1 over 2 times radical 3, which is the same exact thing if you evaluate it as that value that I got. So if you get either of those 2 values for g prime of 0, you will get another point. So last thing we need to do is we need to figure out what this k prime of 0 is. So we basically are just going to plug in the values that we already have. Actually, a little hint on the AP test. If you feel comfortable with this, by the way, this was radical 3, I didn't actually finish that problem. You don't even need to go to the trouble of simplifying this out. If you put this answer, you're done. Believe it or not, they will give you full credit for what I have here right now. If you would rather simplify it out, which I think most people would, you end up getting 2.598. So part B is actually very similar to part A, except that in part A you had a product, in part B you have a quotient, which means you are going to use the quotient rule. So my first thing I'm going to do is figure out what this derivative of m prime is. So go ahead, use the quotient rule. If you remember, we're going to do the bottom value times the derivative of the top minus the top times the derivative of the bottom all over your denominator, bottom of the fraction squared. So then you're going to just plug in values of 5. I recommend, if you haven't already, try to evaluate the rest of this on your own. Please pause the video and do that. I'm going to go through this last part, the second part of this, for a little bit faster. So g of 5 you're going to get just by evaluating that expression for g of x. You get radical 23. G prime of 5, you can either do that on the calculator or you can do it by hand. If you do it by hand, you get 9 over 2 radical 23. Not a very pleasant one, so if you would like to do it on the calculator, you end up just getting 0.938. For f of 5, if you look at the graph, you'll notice that when x is 5, y is also 5. And then for f prime of 5, as with the previous problem, you can use the slope of the line. I found that the slope of that line was negative 2/3. So the scoring on this problem, you will get, first of all, you get a point for either of these two answers for g prime of 5. You get a point for the negative 2/3. The third point can be earned one of two ways. You either can plug in the values that you just got and stop. This actually would give you full credit, what I have on the screen right here. Or if you don't feel comfortable just leaving a fraction like that, you can simplify it out on your calculator. You get negative 0.171. Actually, the reason I say it's a good idea to do the first method and just leave the fraction is because I did this problem and I actually got the wrong answer because I think I made a calculator mistake. So if you get something super complicated like this, you will still get full credit if you just write it in unsimplified form. So for part C, we're finding the value of x in this interval -1 to 2 such that f prime equals h prime. First thing you're going to do is you need to figure out f prime, and the second thing is to figure out h prime. So let's start with the f. So in that interval, -1 to 2, that actually is on the graph right here. F prime, remember we said earlier that f prime was the slope of the tangent line. In this case, the graph is a straight line, so it's just the slope of that line. Actually, the whole entire place, since it's a straight line, the whole entire graph has a slope of +2. We found that in part A. So that's the first part of this. The second thing is finding h prime. This one, you are just going to use this equation that you had. You can't really do much on a calculator for that one, but this one's not really that hard to find as long as you remember your rules. So this is my derivative. Actually, if you do this, you get a point. So then the second thing I'm going to do is I need to figure out where f prime is equal to h prime. So first thing I know is I know that f prime is 2. The second thing I know is that h prime is that expression that I got above there. Best way to solve this one is, in fact, the only way you can really solve it would be to use your calculator. And on your calculator, I recommend that you solve by graphing. In fact, for all the ones where you're solving, I think solving by graphing is probably the easiest way to do it. I'm going to show you how you would type it in. If you have more questions, please email me or just let me know in office hours at some point. The solving by graphing, that's another thing you are expected to know how to do on the AP test. So in your calculator, go to y equals. You're going to be putting 2 into y1. You're going to be putting this 5e to the x minus 9 cosine of x into y2. You need to find the intersection point. So you're going to look for the x value of the intersection point because we're looking for an x. You'll find that this graph has a bunch of different intersection points. You're going to want the one that's in the interval -1 to 2. You will find that the answer is x equals 0.622. This is the final place where you can earn a point on this problem. And then we're done with it.